Hi, welcome to another episode of the TK Podcast. I'm one of your hosts, Alex, and for this episode, I'm joined by my co-host, Anushka. In this episode, we are talking about racial concerns in the workplace and how you can address them without fear of persecution. Our special guest for this podcast is Keisha French, an internal recruiter for Softcat's apprenticeship scheme and a leader of Softcat's BAME network. Keisha was one of my favorite guests, and I'm excited for you guys to hear her insight. So wherever you are, grab a notebook and a pen and enjoy the TK Podcast. So hello and welcome to the fourth episode of the TK Podcast. Today I am joined by my co-host Nush. How are you, Nush? How's everything?
I'm doing really well, thanks, Alex. You?
Yeah, not bad. It's I've had a good day. It's been a really, really fantastic day, and I'm really looking forward to the insights that we're going to be getting from our magnificent guest, Keisha French.
Me too.
Hi, Keisha. How are you?
Hello. Yeah, I'm very well, thanks. How are you today?
Yes, I'm good. So for today, the topic that we are focusing on is racial concerns in the workplace. But before we get into that, I thought it might be good, Keisha, for you to give a little bit of background about yourself and your journey and everything like that. And then after that, we can start delving a little bit deeper into the topic at hand.
Yeah, perfect. So my name is Keisha. I am currently a recruiter for Softcat PLC, and I work alongside Nush in the HR department. I've been at Softcat now for about 2 years, 4 months, which has absolutely flown by. I actually started out in the sales team, but this year made that transition into recruitment. And alongside my role, I'm also one of the leaders of the Softcat BAME network, which has a strong team of 3 other leaders, as well as 2 admin assistants as well. And we help to run the network, which is the BAME network at Softcat.
And she's a super amazing human being as well with it all. Not biased.
Oh, thanks, Nush. I could say. Thank you, Nush. Thank you very much for that.
So interesting. From sales into recruitment, what made you sort of make that change? I know that's not completely on topic, but I'm just intrigued.
Yeah, no, of course. So I left uni with an English Lit degree, totally relevant for everything that I'm doing. I had no idea what I wanted to do, and I kind of got promoted into sales, if you like. So a recruitment company approached me and said, we think you've got the skills needed and required for sales. And I was successful, and I joined a company and was there for 2 years. Then I joined an estate agent company. The less said about that one, the better. And then I found Softcat, and I'd always been in sales, and I was good at it, and at times I was great at it, but the passion kind of got lost, and the love for it very quickly evaporated. And I just knew that my priorities had changed from when I went into that. And the more that I spent at Softcat, and the more time I spent with the networks in particular, and like speaking to Nush, I really realised that my passions were on the people side of the business. As much as I really enjoyed speaking to my customers, where I really, really got going was when we were talking about anything to do with our people. And that's when I decided I need to be in a role that is centered around our people. And through the support of Nush and Rebecca Monk, HR director, and Rachel Cowell, the kind of head of recruitment, they helped me on the journey to get into that team, and that's how I got there, basically.
Okay, so could you tell me a bit about your the role you're in now, just so the listeners, because some might not be privy to what a recruitment individual does. Just give us a bit of insight.
So I'm part of the internal recruitment team, and it's our job really to recruit for all the people that started Softcat. In particular, I recruit for our apprenticeship scheme. So that is level 3 apprenticeships, which is mainly catered to the school leaver market. So it's my job to recruit for that school leaver bracket, and also collaborate with schools to get young people and people at school interested in technology. And we do a lot of work as well, specifically in the D&I space, of encouraging ethnic minorities and women as well into the world of technology, in a nutshell.
It's really apt, actually, isn't it, Alex? Because we've been talking quite a lot about the younger generation and how companies are evolving. So it'd be really good to hear like Keisha's perspective from that kind of, when you're recruiting that talent, what do companies need to be aware of as well?
Yeah, most definitely. I guess that's the question I was going to ask. What do you look for when you're looking for sort of school leavers or university leavers to join Softcat? What makes them a perfect fit?
It's really simple. It's what are their desires to go into an apprenticeship scheme? So why do they want to do an apprenticeship? And really, why do they want to work for Softcat specifically? We're not looking for the experience. We understand that at that age or at the school leaver bracket, they're not going to have umps of experience. We just want the passion to be there and the drive to want to do well, because a big element of their job is going to be the learning aspect. So they've got to have that passion to see the learning through. But really, that's the criteria, just ensuring that they've got the passion. Our application process helps to assess if they're a cultural fit, and then that's how you get in, basically.
Okay, and just for some of the younger listeners who might have their ears pricked up thinking, oh, this is a great opportunity for me to get some experience in the IT industry, what type of roles are available to apply for? Or is it sort of they have a flavour of each role while they're within that internship?
No, that's a good question. So we don't do it rotationally. So an apprentice will start and they will be in a specific role for the duration of their apprenticeship. So we do sales apprentices, we have customer service, marketing. Sometimes we do finance. It really changes. We will always have sales apprentices, but sometimes we get new roles that come about. And there's mainly two qualifications that they'll do. They'll either be an IT technical salesperson or a business administration. So for young people, don't be worried if you think, I don't know what that role means. I'm not sure if I want to be in customer service. Just have a rough idea of the kind of things that you're into, the kind of stuff that you've done at school, and we will guide you in that process of saying we think you'd be a really good fit for this role or that role.
Yeah, no, thank you. No, I think that's really helpful for a lot of our listeners. Sorry, Nush, did you
I was
want
going
to
to say, yeah,
make a comment?
yeah, just a quick question there. Like, what we always talk about how some particularly women and even ethnic minorities aren't that attracted to the IT industry. We can see that there is a gap when it comes to the number of like the employers that have ethnic minorities at different levels, but just that attraction piece as well. What kind of how do you overcome that? What kind of questions do you get at that grassroots level to help overcome that challenge that they might face?
I think it's a difficult one, Nush. I think it's assessing in particular what those challenges are, because they're going to be specific for different groups, alleviating some of the concerns that groups have. I know there's stats that say that, for example, a man is more likely to apply for a role where, I don't know the percentage, but they're more likely to apply for a role where they don't have all the experience than a woman would, for example.
Yeah.
So therefore, it's meeting those groups halfway, alleviating their concerns. If that makes sense, and then therefore understanding what their hurdles are and making sure as a business that you are minimizing those as much as possible.
Yeah, of course, because I know that even from the when we first started doing apprenticeships at Softcat, there was that kind of little barrier, wasn't there, between, should I go to university, should I do an apprenticeship, and then that next kind of barrier, which is, should I do an apprenticeship in a specific field, and is sales kind of the place to be, is IT industry the place to be? So there's quite a lot to overcome, really, isn't there, when you're at that kind of age? What kind of tips again for the listeners who are out there at the moment who particularly might be interested in that kind of stuff? What kind of tips would you give them when it comes to understanding the business and understanding kind of the roles that they could take on?
I think definitely go on the websites of businesses that you're interested in and do some research, understand what kind of business they are, what roles are currently being advertised. There's some great organisations as well that specifically hire or advertise apprenticeship type roles, so feel free to reach out to them to guide you as well, and definitely use your careers advice at school or if you're at college, as they will also be able to guide you as well. And you don't have to know what you're going to do. When I was 18, I thought I was going to be a journalist, and here I am, not a journalist. You don't know, you don't have to know what you want to do at the age of 18. It's perfectly, or 16 or 15 or whatever it is. Just as long as you know what your passions are, what you're good at, what you enjoy, and your career's guidance and those employers will help you get on that journey to finding what's best for you.
Yeah, amazing. Thanks.
So, given the information that you shared with us, how can someone who's from a culturally underrepresented background get into these roles? Because there's a certain stigma attached to it that when they do get these roles or when they do apply for these roles, they're going to get rejected for whatever reason, experience, or someone's looked at their name and thought, okay, this person from that background, etc., etc. How can they position themselves in the best way to be able to get onto these apprenticeships?
Quite frankly, it's not on the candidate to do any of that. It's the job of the employer to make sure that we're at a stage now where we're not discriminating anymore. Now, we shouldn't be there anymore as a society. We've come a very, very long way. And if anything, from the discussions I've had with lots of businesses and industry, etc., D&I is very much on the radar. Lots of businesses are reviewing how do we ensure that we're making our processes fair for all. So it's not for a candidate to change anything. You be yourself. And if you come up against an employer and you feel like you're being discriminated against or in that application process, then first of all, that employer is not the right employer for you. And that's a them problem. It's never a candidate problem. So I think it's less about what a candidate should do to make themselves more employable, but what employees should do or employers should do to make the processes as fair as possible for all, really.
Sure. And then from an employer standpoint, what's the framework that should be set up to allow them to feel comfortable enough to approach these businesses and make applications and go through the interviewing process to then receive that job at the end?
Do you mean for the candidates, like the people applying?
I mean for the business. How does the business set itself up?
There's lots of organisations out there. If a business feels that they're not inept or they're not there yet in terms of those processes, they don't have to go for it alone. There's lots of organisations out there that are really catered around that kind of consultancy and getting a business to where they need to be. There's things like the Institute for Student Employers, but there's also organisations as well that specifically help employers with their recruitment processes. So it's reach out for support. Don't feel like you have to do it all by yourself. It can be quite daunting as a business to think we've got to start this journey. Things like TCare should hopefully help with that. Seeking advice. So just, I would say, find those organisations that can help you with those goals.
Yeah. I agree, Keisha. There's always so many opportunities to idea share with other organisations because everyone's got to start from somewhere, haven't they? Like the number of conversations. I mean, like that's, again, like you just said, using TCare for that. There's so many organisations that would have had to start from like baseline to get certain processes right. And actually, it's kind of evolving those processes and not kind of keeping, you don't stay stuck to that specific process for years to come. It's always about evolving and challenging those processes to improve that candidate experience at the end of the day, isn't it?
Yeah. When I was in sales, we used to have coaching in another organisation that I worked for, and there's this fantastic coach, an external coach, and she said the reason why she was as successful as she is because she was always open to change. No matter how long she'd been in the sector for, no matter how experienced she was always privy to what was happening and was open to changing and evolving. And I think we can all learn from that as an individual or as an organisation, that don't be complacent, always be up to date with what's happening in the market and adjust accordingly.
Yeah, I think that's great advice as well. Whoever was that external person that came in, big kudos to them. I just want to change the point of conversation slightly and focus on the point now where you've got this job, whether it be an apprenticeship or a full-time role, and you're coming into the workplace with your own conceptions of how it's going to be like, maybe because of previous experiences you've had in previous roles where you may be a woman or you may be someone who's Muslim or whatever you may be, and you felt like you was mistreated because of that specific area. How does the business set that person up to feel comfortable once they've started in the new role to be able to express themselves fully?
there's probably a number of processes that need to happen before that person starts. So it's just making sure that you have a truly inclusive environment, an organic environment, so that when the new person comes in, they can already feel it and sense it. I'd like to think now, for example, when a person joins Softcat, they can really feel the community sense and all the networks that we have going on. There's always conversations happening, events happening, and that's happened organically over time. We don't just do it as a reactionarily thing of, we've got X amount of minorities starting, quick, we need to do stuff to make them comfortable. Focus on the bigger piece, which is the creating an environment in which people feel comfortable. And then naturally, when new people start, they'll feel that. In fact, they'll be more
They'll be a
receptive
part
to
of
it than
it.
someone who's been there for years, and they will be a part of it. Yeah, 100%.
Yeah.
Exactly. And what would you define as being sort of the key pillars to making everyone feel culturally comfortable when they come into Softcat?
I think the most pivotal thing has been, and particularly for Softcat and many other organisations, it was creating that safe space for people in which they can meet people who look like them, have gone through those experiences. When I started Softcat, there was no BAME network, and though the office that I reported into, which was Birmingham, was one of the most diverse ones in Softcat at the time. When we did kind of launch the BAME network, that was the saving grace for me, because I got to meet like-minded people. I got to meet people who looked like me, who've been through similar experience to me, so that when something happened, I knew I wasn't by myself, and that's been pivotal. And I'm sure Nush will agree that has changed
Totally.
so many things for us as a business by having that network. So I think it's really important, whether it looks like a network, whether it's a committee, that you just draw a circle and allow people to have that space. In which to engage with other ethnic minorities or whatever denomination it might be.
Yeah. And going back to that safe space, that's kind of the one thing that was our ultimate aim. Like, the first objective was about creating a safe space, and it has to be a network. Some organisations that or previous listeners might have heard it being called employee resource groups, or ERGs. We call them networks at Softcat, just to keep it really simple, especially when we're talking internally and externally. But they're all led by the people of Softcat. I haven't got I'm not a leader of any of the networks, but we've got different people from different parts of the organisation, from different parts of the country, all leading and contributing to it, and evolving it continuously as well.
Yeah, and that point around across the country, Nush, it's meant that I've been able to make friends and network with people from the Dublin office, the Glasgow office, London, opportunities that otherwise, reporting into Birmingham, I would not have had that exposure and that chance to meet those people. So it's been a real benefit, I would say.
So how important do you think having that community is for the business in general, not just the individual? How is it helping build the company culture and innovate it?
I think it's imperative to us improving not just diversity in terms of ethnicity, but diversity of thought as well. You're drawing from experiences from a cross section of the business, all different tenures, and it just means that we can all meet in the middle and have these discussions, and you're getting a variety of different responses to problems and creating a variety of different solutions, if that makes sense. And what's important as well is with the BAME network, I know BAME is a contentious word, by the way, and it's been debated whether it should be used or not. We as a network decided we wanted to keep that name, but we are very inclusive as well. So we actually encourage allies to come. So you don't have to be BAME to join. And it means, therefore, that our white allies get exposure to conversations that they've never been privy to. A lot of people come from areas that are majority white. They would never be exposed to the kind of conversations that we're having. So it gives that kind of experience as well to on the other side to those.
Yeah, no, and I think allyship has been something that's been mentioned a lot in the podcast series that we've been putting together. And I think it is something that, I don't want to say it's a new term, but it's definitely something I've seen more of with people coming into businesses and explaining what it means and how you can be an ally. And that's not only around race, it's also around LGBTQ plus and
all areas.
And all areas, honestly, all areas. And I think that might be, in my opinion, the catalyst, or one of the big catalysts for change. making that an aware term to people, and then when the new generation comes in, they'll know that, okay, we've got allies here, we've got this here, we've got this BAME set up here, we've also got the ERGs, I believe they're called, as well within the business. We've got the network set up as well, and I think it's going to be, we're moving in the right direction, which is the main thing, and I think that's fantastic. I really do.
Yeah. Allies are the key drivers for change, because you can have a group that are going through something, but unless you have advocates outside of the spheres of people who are going through it, then you won't experience that change. And it's getting the allies on board with all of the networks that have really helped to drive the community piece and the network piece into our business to such an extent that now community is one of our values. That's how much it's changed in the past 2 years or so. So it is imperative, that allyship piece. And we're all allies, aren't we? Even within the kind of ethnicity space, we're all allies to people different from ourselves.
Yeah, for sure.
That's important.
Yeah, Keisha, you might be able to just I guess some of this is kind of sanity checking that it's also working at Softcat. But one of the things that I've kind of noticed over probably the last kind of year or so is how confidence across those allies as well, having either gone through training or participated in more learning through the networks, they've been there to, they've just had that newfound confidence to call in what we call in rather than call out behaviour. Have you seen that, and have you observed that yourself as well?
Yeah, definitely. I think it's given empowerment to any victims who might experience any form of discrimination to feel empowered that you will be listened to, but it stopped the passive kind of the passiveness, which is historically people might have witnessed something but thought, I wasn't the victim, it's not my place, I'm not going to say anything. I definitely think it has allowed people to say, you know what, I'm not going to be passive anymore. It's not enough to be not racist. I need to be, for example, anti-racist. I need to be anti homophobia, etc. And I think that's really empowered people to actually speak up and, like you say, call people in, call people to account. And I've seen that in this business, definitely. I've heard of a few cases of where lines have been towed and now people feel empowered to say, you crossed the line, stop.
Yeah. And do you think that's helped? I mean, like one of the main topics of this conversation was really about feeling confident to address issues or racial concerns in the workplace without thinking that you're going to be condemned for it, or people are going to think negatively of you. I was talking to Alex earlier, and we were saying how, like, generation wise, I remember like my parents were kind of that generation where it was like kind of just shut up and put up, and just get on with it, just work hard, just do your job, you get paid, and then like kind of prove your worth, so to speak. I know allyship has really helped that now, but what about kind of before, like allyship as well? Like Alex said, it's kind of a new term, really. It's becoming more popular in terms of its use. But what about pre that, and generationally, has that changed, do you think?
Drastically. And by the way, when we talk about our organisation, we're not saying that we're there yet. There's a lot that still needs to happen. But yeah, it has changed. I mean, if we look at my nan, for example, my nan came over in the 60s. She still doesn't tell me exactly when, for whatever reason. That's fine, nan. But she came over in the 60s, and she was a nurse, or she was a health assistant when she started. She came as part of the Windrush generation, and they were told, please come over, your mother country needs you. And what did she get when she got here? She got discrimination in all forms. It was in the workplace, it was on the street, it was in housing. She had all kinds of names thrown at her that I won't share here. You can imagine what she must have had. And her attitude was, I need to prove my position here. I need to prove that I deserve my citizenship as a British citizen, that I deserve my place here. And that's what she spent most of her working life doing, proving that she deserved it. And that was, you don't say anything, you certainly don't report it, you don't want to be the aggravator, you just you stay quiet, and you hope one day that they might see you as someone who is British. And by the time you get to the next generation, which is all of her kids and my mum, whatever, it was still there. It was there in education, it was there in the workplace. I think they were probably more privy to the idea that this isn't okay. Actually, I was born in this country and this isn't right, but I still don't think they're empowered enough to feel like as though they could make a noise about it enough without being penalised. My auntie, very unique. She's Black, Scottish, brought up in the 1960s, and wow, the amount of kind of abuse that she received. She just said, I just had to put up with it. That's just the way it was. And I think it was all to do with, back then it was more institutionally kind of racist.
Yeah.
There were institutions set up where that experience is just not going to be heard from the top all the way down to the bottom. And I think in that respect, things have changed. I would like to think anyway, particularly in the private sector, I would say.
Yeah, for sure. I'd agree with that. And it's funny because I've got, you said your nan was a nurse. My nan was also a nurse as well when she came across as part of that Windrush generation. And yeah, some of the stories that she shared with me, I was like, I don't think I'd survive, to be honest. But she made a...
And my nan said that to me as well. She said, I used to come home crying like, Nan, this person said this to me. She was like, well, if you were around when I was here.
Yeah.
I was like, oh, gee, thanks, Nan. That's helpful. But she was right, She's trying to say, you guys, you think that's bad. You should have heard and bearing in mind, she came pretty much by herself. She had nobody, and to experience that, and you've got nobody the law doesn't support you, your employer doesn't support you. Yeah, I can't fathom that, to be honest. It's different. It's otherworldly almost.
Yeah, it's almost
incredible,
like
isn't it?
That generation walked so that we were able to run, I guess, really.
100%.
I think it's...
You're going to say something about your nan as well.
No, that was literally what I was going to say. That comment I just made, that was what she always used to say to me. She was like, our generations come here so that you can thrive and you can achieve great things, and your children and your children's children can be doctors and nurses, MPs, even astronauts, whatever they want to be, because you're now in a land of much more opportunity. So she's kind of said, my sacrifice isn't in vain. It's so that you can achieve what you want to do. So,
and I think they achieved that purpose, and that's why it was so upsetting with the Windrush scandal. When you think of all that generation had done for this country, for the next generation, and to see how they were treated was very upsetting, to be honest with you. And that's just an example of how really, yes, some things have changed in some respects, but in others we've still got so much to go. For the people of the past and the people of the present as well, we've still got so much to do, and so much more needs to be done, basically.
Yeah, I agree. But sort of shifting back to the topic, I know we will have a lot of business leaders and sales leaders as well who are listening to the podcast, and I'm wondering that if you could share maybe a framework that they could use so that their employees feel comfortable to talk about any racial concerns they have within the workplace.
I think it's important. I mean, I'm not expert on this. This is just my opinion. That's what Nush on the call for. She's more of the expert. I think when you're dealing with it, it's very important that you understand, first of all, what the kind of modern day concerns could be nowadays. So, for example, it's the fact that, prejudice and discrimination still happens, and there needs to be an acknowledgement that it does happen. I think sometimes when a victim comes forward, we're always quick to say to the victim, oh, but they didn't mean it. Oh, they didn't mean it in that way. I think we need to get away from that now. We need to amplify those voices that are brave enough to come out and really listen to what they're saying. And I think stuff like having a more ethnically diverse management team, for example, a more diverse management team in general will help with that. It will empower people to feel like I can come forward and I am going to be listened. I think often in the past you raise things and it's been dismissed, and that's because you're raising it to, quite frankly, a team of white management who have never lived your experience. They don't know what that means to you, and therefore they can be quite dismissive of it. It was a joke, it was banter, it wasn't meant in that way. Yes, but that's how I feel, so please take me seriously. So I think it's understanding the challenges that an ethnic minority or any minority might go through, and just making sure that you've got the best team of people to be able to deal with that in a good way. if that makes sense.
Yeah,
Yeah,
you
yeah.
we still hear that kind of now. I mean, like I look back at my time, not like at Softcat, I started with like a bunch of guys, and I still work. The majority of my stakeholders are all still men, but I just remember, and this is no disrespect to Softcat at all, but there was quite a lot of banter back then as well. And we're talking about our parents' generation and our grandparents' generation, where they might have just put up with it. I probably even think like 21 years ago, it was kind of harmless. It didn't kind of affect me negatively, but if I was going through that now and experiencing it, I know that absolutely wouldn't be right, and more people are happier happier and confident based on the environment they're in to kind of go, actually, what you've just said there isn't right. But not everybody feels like that in all of their organisations still. So
Not even today, yeah.
yeah, so I mean, like when you say we've still got a long way to go, yes, we've come a long way, but yeah, you look at it and you go, oh my gosh, I can't believe like we're still saying things like that, or we're still hearing things like that. Do you think there's still people who just are too still afraid to speak up? Like, what's your understanding outside of Softcat, or even within Softcat? Do you still think people might be a little bit fearful?
So if you think of the working population, you've got everyone from the age of, is it 16 till, I don't know what
64.
What's the retirement age? There you go.
64.
So that 64 bracket, say 50 plus, they experienced that really harsh racism in the 70s, in the 80s, in the 90s. And they're seeing a society changing, but they might still not feel as empowered because where they have in the past, they've been stung, they've been dismissed and whatever else. So I still think there are still probably pockets of people that don't feel empowered. I think where you've got that intersectionality piece as well. So you've got, for example, you might be a woman who is black and you're from a certain socioeconomic background. That's me, for example. I was brought up in a council house from a working class, or really a lower class family, as it will. I'm a woman. To be given an opportunity of a job, if my auntie, one of my aunties, she won't mind me saying, if ever I said to her, "Oh, this was said," she'd be like, "No, don't say anything. It's a really good job. Don't jeopardize it. It's not worth it. It's a really good job. You've done really well." In their head, they're like, "But you've got your foot in the door. Keep that foot in." And I'm like, "But I don't want my foot in the door if they're not going to listen to me." I think those are the differences. It's the good immigrant pieces, and it's still ingrained in people's heads that just be quiet, just assimilate. And I think the younger generation they're not tolerant of that anymore. Actually, I don't need to prove myself anymore. I am here and I'm not going to tolerate that kind of behavior. And there's constant debate about it, even in my own family, between the generations, because the older ones are used to just not saying anything, and they're like, you're too opinionated. Why are you bringing up everything? It's like, because as a collective, we've had enough. I don't want to tolerate it any further. If I see something wrong, I am going to say something now. We don't
and in fact, you're doing what you're doing what your grandmother did, and that's paving the way for the next generation as well. So that it is easier along the line, aren't they?
Exactly. And it's just an adjustment each time, isn't it? It's not to say that the generation before us were wrong in their approach. They had a different set of challenges. These are a new set of challenges, and we have a new response to them. Basically, but in answer to your question, I definitely still think there are people who, no matter what we've done so far, they still don't feel empowered, and it's because there's still organisations out there where they don't feel they can speak up and they're going to be supported, unfortunately.
Yeah, which is such, when I say such a shame, because I kind of look at our journey and we have come a long way, as does all of us in T-Care who are at different stages when it comes to talking about racial equality. We are, as our founding members, we are all at different levels, but the one thing that is really consistent is we're really passionate about making that next level of change as an industry to actually help the industry. I'd probably say, like, I was gonna, not to steal kind of some of your questions, Alex, because I know you're kind of the key lead on this one, but what's the one thing that you would say to an employee from or an ethnic minority employee, as this is about racial equality, this podcast is a bit more about race, what would be your advice when it comes to speaking about things that are meaningful, raising concerns? How do you think, what advice would you give them to raise concerns that they might have?
Never be afraid to. always speak up, even if it's going to hurt, even if it's going to cause pain. Always feel empowered to speak up. Do not put up and shut up anymore. We don't need to do that anymore. If you feel like you've been discriminated against, speak up. You'd like to think that you could speak to your manager, but if you can't in that case, take it to HR. And if you don't feel like you're getting that support, there's so many organisations out there that can help you from a legal point of view to know what your rights are. Things like ACAS, things like Citizens Advice. Just feel empowered is what I would say. When I was a student, I worked at a student accommodation, and I received racism. I was doing a viewing and I had the most obscene things said to me by this one person. But I did that. I shut up and put up because I was like, this is a really good job. I don't want to jeopardize my position. I spoke to my manager about it and said, you know what, I had this viewing. I was very uncomfortable. They said these things. My manager literally, not physically grabbed me, but really got my attention and said, Keisha, if I could give you any advice, please never tolerate anything like that ever again. I don't care if you're part-time. I don't care what your position is. It doesn't matter how long you've been here. You do not have to tolerate that. If you'd have told me at the time, we would have kicked them out. We'd have stopped that. I don't want to have business with somebody like that. And she's the person that changed the mindset for me, that she's right. I will never put up with something like that again. Unfortunately, not everybody has that advocate who will tell them, but just feel empowered in yourself to speak up is what I would say. And hopefully you'll work for an organisation that takes it seriously. And if they don't, A, there's support out there if you feel like you haven't had the right response, and B, there are better organisations out there. Quite frankly, don't waste your time. Life is short. If you're not working for an organisation that aligns with your values and supports you when you need to, go find the better one, because there's plenty out there.
Yeah, no, I agree with that advice. Yeah, I think that's superb. I wanted to step back to the part that you mentioned about you had sort of like a role model who said you shouldn't be tolerating that type of behavior. Was there anyone else on your journey who you felt like was that pivotal and maybe helped change your feelings or thoughts about a particular business or entering the office world, for example?
So I think she was definitely one of them, and that was my manager when I worked at the student accommodation. I've had some great role models in the past of really good management who've helped me on my journey. My previous sales team leader was absolutely fantastic in that. He's unfortunately left Softcat, but he was very pivotal in making sure that that I understood that I would be heard and I would be listened to. I've had adverse things as well, not necessarily just racial discrimination. I think there's lots of intersections as well. So in the past where I've suffered with mental health adversity, I've had very bad advice from bad managers and luckily I've always been strong enough. Us Frenchies, we're very strong and very obnoxious in that we are like we can't be fought, we can't be pinned down. We do not get knocked easily. And luckily, when I did receive bad management, I knew enough that it was more of a them problem than a me. But unfortunately, not everybody knows that. They get bad management, they're given bad advice. They don't realise that it's less to do with them and more to do with that leader is not a leader. So yeah, I have been very fortunate that along the way, I've had some support, but I've had knockbacks as well. I remember particularly when I was going for my A levels, I wanted to go to the University of Manchester. I was told I was not. It was categorically, you are not going to get the grades. You're not. You're on track for B, C, D, and something else. You're not going to get it. And I got 2 A stars and 2 A's, and it was more as a my language, stick 2 fingers up to them to prove to them I can. Don't tell me I cannot. I think that would be my advice to people. You are, as an ethnic minority or any minority, you're more likely to hear the no's than you are the yeses, but don't listen to people. There is no glass ceiling. You keep striving. If you want something, you can get it. You 100% can, would be my advice.
Amazing.
So do you believe in the statement that if you're an ethnic minority, you have to work twice as hard?
Unfortunately, yes. And it's because you have to prove yourself. Everybody has to prove themselves in terms of their role, but you're compounded in that you have to prove you're working against the stereotypes that have already been put up against you before you even open your mouth. So I am a black woman. I've got my afro. It's slightly pinned down today. I'm a curvaceous lady. if you don't mind me saying. And with all those things, I'm a Caribbean, you know. People say and with that comes a set of stereotypes. So I've been told I am loud, I'm aggressive, I'm you know, I'm intimidating, and sometimes I've not spoken, or I've been very quiet. But those are the kind of things that work against you. That angry black woman trope is something that no matter who you are, what you represent, that will always follow you. So you do have to work twice as hard because you're working against the stereotypes that have been put up against you, and then you're having to work to prove your worth in your role. And unfortunately, whether we like it or not, that is the lived-in experience of any ethnic or any minority. They have a set of things put up against them.
Yeah.
And
So with
and
that,
do you think? Sorry, go on, Nish.
Sorry, Alex, carry on. Sounds like you've got a great question coming on. You carry on.
I was going to say, could you touched upon the stereotypes there? Do you think we'll ever get to a point within the working world where we've sort of debunked these ethnic stereotypes? And if so, when do you think that will be? Do you think that'll be within sort of your time of working, or do you think it's going to be a little bit further than that?
It's really hard to say because I think stereotypes evolve and change. I don't think we're ever going to get away from them. I think they'll evolve as new term, like for example, woke is a word now, wokeness, and now has created a new stereotype of people who are woke and what that means to be woke, for example. So I don't think we're ever going to get away from stereotypes as such. I'd just like to think that we call and hold people to account for those who judge and treat people to stereotypes. I'd like to think we start to erase as many as possible, but I don't think, whether it's pessimistic or not, I don't think we're ever realistically, unfortunately, going to get away from stereotypes. It's the way that we are as humans, unfortunately. We do stereotype without even realise we're doing it.
Yeah. I mean, I kind of agree with that. I think stereotypes, in some senses, is a good thing, right? Because you can have positive stereotypes and negative stereotypes. And the reason that it is a stereotype is because there's a generalization amongst those people that is somewhat correct to some percentage, whether it be small or slightly large. But I do think, especially in the working world, there needs to just be a change of story that happens over time. And listeners, if you've listened to the podcast before that we've had with Colin, and he mentioned about the role models and sort of the people who we look up to within the industry, I think they're going to be the types of people that change that, because we're going to say, oh, so-and-so is CTO at Softcat, for example, and their background is Caribbean and XYZ, and they will understand their story. And when we get more and more of those, eventually, I think we'll be able to change how the book's been written. So
it will at least stop. It will at least them say, here are a set of stereotypes, but I realise that we can't fit people into those boxes. It's not realistic, and I shouldn't judge people based on a set of stereotypes. They exist, but I'm not going to do anything about them. I'm not going to judge someone based on preconceptions. And I'd like to say that we're there yet, but there are still people who will stereotype. It's just us as an organisation identifying and holding people to account when they do.
And what about so what when we'll have a lot of employers listening to this podcast as well, Keisha, who probably are like kind of just a bit nervous about even starting the conversations or allowing people. I mean, I'd like to hope that most of the organisations listening today will be allowing their workforce to speak up, but they might be a little bit worried about what it might turn into, or what the conversations might what the starters are going to be. What advice would you give to the employers listening to the call, the organisations listening to this call, and to encourage good dialogue and how to create that culture of people being okay speaking about their backgrounds and any concerns that they might have?
I would say it's perfectly okay to be afraid, but that it needs to happen eventually, because plenty of organisations are now addressing that this needs to happen. We need to have these conversations, because if we don't, then it's ignorance, isn't it? You're ignoring a situation that exists. Your employees are not going to feel empowered to speak up, and they'll just leave. And Nush, we went on that journey at Softcat, didn't we?
Yeah.
We're talking today on this subject, but there's been a lot of pain and there's been a lot of stuff that we've had to do at Softcat to get to this point. And there was a lot of fear. There was a lot of fear of bringing up subjects. Is this appropriate for the workplace? Do we want to go there? But as an organisation, we said now's the time when we need to start talking about it. We need to provide a safe space for ethnic minorities and other minorities to come together, and we need to be comfortable in the uncomfortable. And and there have been some very difficult conversations, but we've got to a position now where people are starting to feel empowered. And we wouldn't have got there had we acknowledged that we're not doing enough, we're not speaking about it enough. Let's start. It's going to be painful, but let's go on that journey. And we're still on that journey now.
Yeah, we still are. Yeah. And that's the thing. You've just got to constantly check in. And everyone's at different points in their journey, whether you're starting off to start, addressing some of the concerns that might exist amongst your employees. But the bit that I think you started with, which was about creating that inclusive culture, making sure that everyone can come to work and be themselves, that is just so imperative. Otherwise, none of the discussions actually work.
Well, yeah, if we didn't have if we didn't create that safe space, which was the BAME network for me, I wouldn't be on this call. I wouldn't be able to speak about these experiences because I wouldn't have known that I have the power to do so. I wouldn't have known that my organisation are going to back me and allow me to. So it's so important. And obviously we're talking about race today, but this applies to all manner. We've got a number of networks: neurodiversity, pride, women. For any ethnic minority, the first stage is it's really important that you empower them to be able to have, and I'm not talking about negative, just any conversation.
Just any conversation,
Let's celebrate, let's educate, but let's talk.
Yeah.
That's what's needed as a starting point.
Agreed. I know we're coming a little bit close to the end, but I wanted to ask you a question that I think I've actually got circled on my OneNote, funny enough, which is around which is more difficult if there's a scenario where you're seeing some type of racial abuse within the workplace. Is it harder for the victim to report it, or is it harder for the ally to report it? And I'd just like to maybe get a view from both of you and maybe just give some reasons to why.
That's a difficult one.
It's a real tough one.
I would always say the victim, because they're the ones who've had to experience it, and now I have to go through that little bit of trauma in raising it, making sure that I'm validated, that they're going to believe me. But I don't take away from the fact that it's very difficult as an ally it's an awkward one. It's very awkward. I understand the difficulties for an ally in saying, you know what, I need to hold you to account here. I need to be on the right side of this, particularly if it's your friend that's the perpetrator. That can be quite difficult.
Yeah.
But I would always say it's going to be hardest for the victim personally. I don't know about you, Nush.
Yeah, I tend to agree with that, actually, which goes back to some of the comments that we've talked about around allyship behaviour. Is it has to, as much as it might be a newer thing to embrace, it's actually like kind of making sure that your organisation understands what true allyship actually means, and making sure that everyone feels comfortable with that kind of behaviour and having those traits. I think I've mentioned on a previous podcast about, like if you're living and breathing your company values, and you've got kind of people at the centre of your organisation, allyship shouldn't be a massive jump. You would always back your mates, wouldn't you? You'd always back people that if you see somebody that's hurt, you'd kind of help them, wouldn't you? And I think with this, it's because it's a complex, or it can seem like it's a complicated conversation. Yeah, if you just boil it down to what's right and wrong, it should be easy. Like we always talk about, have a growth mindset, be curious, stand up for your colleagues, and actually that then filters down into your family, the community that we're serving as well. So it goes well beyond just your organisation as well, I think. So whilst it could be difficult to call in or call out that kind of bad behaviour for allies, I look up to the allies. Actually, we need them in our lives, we need them in our company, and I actually really look up to them, and will absolutely give them a call if I know that someone's actually stood up for somebody, because we need more people like that.
Yeah, that's interesting. I guess my follow-on point to that is that in the long term, then who's more valuable? And I understand the value of the victim and the value of an ally as well. But I mean, in terms of progression in the workplace, so that these things don't happen again, do we need to have more victims who speak out, or more allies that speak out on what's going on, or is it the same? I mean, I feel like
It's for me, it's the allies.
Yeah.
For me, the allies are going to be the key, because we need to stop relying on people who are going through the process to also trail the way for change, because that's a double it's like a double-edged sword, isn't it? I'm going through the pain, but you also want me to help you to make sure this doesn't happen again, whilst I'm also trying to deal with my own grief and what I've just gone through. Whereas the ally, they don't have that pain. They can't sympathize in that respect. They've not gone through it, but they should. We as an ally, you should empower to say, I've seen someone go through this, and I want to be a part of the change to ensure this does not happen again. Adversely, though it's the victim that might go through the pain the most, it's on us allies to pave the way. That's going to be the real catalyst for change, because allies occupy spaces that we will never see. So, for example, a white person in a pub full of white people are going to be privy to conversations that an ethnic minority might never hear. And if you've got a room full of allies advocating on your behalf, they're really going to push that change in a way that you couldn't, even if you was in the room, because you're not going to be privy to the conversations behind closed doors.
Yeah, I get that. That's a good answer. I kind of agree with that as well, in the sense that I think the allies are really going to drive it forward, and especially those allies who are really entrenched with those who have the adverse opinions, to thinking, oh, racism doesn't exist in the workplace, for example, because really your workplace is just one big community, right, with a bunch of different friendship groups within that. And if you can infiltrate every friendship group with the right messaging, over time, those groups will develop and learn, and there'll be an evolution within the business to say, okay, you know what, when we see maybe someone new come into the business and they react to something in a way that we don't agree with, we will sort of huddle up together and say, you know what, this is wrong. And there's a magnitude of us calling it out, which I think is that's sort of the, I don't use the word the dream, because there's probably bits you can build on top of that, but that's where you want it to be, that sort of herd sort of mentality, where everyone's just looking after each other and making sure that they're okay.
Because if you have a perpetrator, they're more likely to listen to the ally that looks like them, that speaks their language. And if they can hear it from them and say, you are wrong, and they're more likely to than them than if, for example, me or Nush gets onto them and says this is wrong. If they're not used to occupying those spaces and joining the BAME network talks, they're just going to shut off. Whereas if you can have an ally that looks like you and sounds like you, saying that I'm going to help you on that journey, this is why you've gone wrong, you're more likely to listen, and that's where change is going to happen, in my opinion.
Yeah.
And Alex, I think the other thing, just in terms of like kind of the bigger picture around organizations and organizations evolving, like we all have a part to play. Like, take race out of the equation. If you're a senior member of the organization, everything from the CEO all the way down to, whichever person is joining your company, even before that as well, like if that attraction piece and wanting to work for an organization, we've all got a part to play in understanding and learning. Like I have a D&I role, but I'm constantly learning. There is always some new term or a new piece of wording or a language change or something that keeps you on your toes, but that learning doesn't stop. And I think back to Keisha's point, that learning doesn't have to be the responsibility of us as ethnic minorities. The learning has to be something that you kind of look at and go, right, okay, I need to take responsibility for myself, for the health and wealth of not just my company, but also my family and my friends and everyone around us, to make us a better person.
Yeah.
Yeah, agreed. I'm just having a little look over the time. I think that's all we've got time for today. So first and foremost, thank you so much, Keisha, for joining us on this episode. Your insight's been fantastic, and I'm sure our listeners have taken a bunch of different notes and are going to be able to take what you said into their businesses and into their lives as well. As usual, thank you, Nush. Your questions, outstanding. Always a little bit better than me.
Oh, stop it, Alex.
But yeah, I appreciate you being here. And first and foremost, thank you to our listeners. No worries. And thank you to our listeners as well. We appreciate you tuning in to this episode, and we look forward to bringing you more inserts. And please engage with TK through our socials. We're very active on LinkedIn and on other social media platforms. If you want to ever get in contact with myself or Nush or Keisha, we'll be more than happy to share some contact information if you've got any questions or queries that you wish to ask. But like I said before, that's all we've got time for. And yeah, thank you for tuning into the TK podcast, and we'll look out for you guys next time. Take care.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks for listening. We hope you enjoyed this episode, and we look forward to hearing your thoughts. So please continue the dialogue on socials. To stay updated on when we release the next episode, follow us on LinkedIn and on Twitter at TC4RE. And don't forget to check our website at www.tcare.org for more information and content on today's topics.